I actually went to a NASCAR race the other day. It felt weird, like I was like going around going like, there's another black person, and there's a black person there. Like I was probably the most racist person there just because I kept pointing out to all the black people.
Well, Troy, let's be honest. No, you weren't. But that said, you might have been the most actively acknowledging the race in the room in a way that you didn't expect.
I know I was the only person that said, there's 2 more niggas.
Out loud.
Out loud, yeah.
The government growing babies. Microchips in your anus. All koala bears are racist. The ozone layer owes me money. Martians invented turkey stuffing. Y'all can't tell me nothing.
Yep. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another phenomenal episode of My Mama Told Me, the podcast where we dive deep into the pockets of black conspiracy theories, and we finally work to prove that the noose in Bubba Wallace's garage was not a hate crime, but rather a warning from a time-traveling nigga from the future to tell Bubba, chill with the NASCAR and learn to host the BET Awards instead. Look, man, you ain't that good at driving. You got to get on the BET Awards. That's what the man from the future was trying to say to him with the noose, and he was completely misinterpreting it. That's the conspiracy theory I'm spreading this week. That's the nonsense I'm putting out in the world. I'm your host, Langston Kerman, as always, coming in hot, baby. Coming in hot. We're back. This is our second week back from hiatus, and I'm happy to be with you, but more importantly, I'm happy to be here with my guest. And here means over Zoom, because I don't think in person ever is going to exist again, because you niggas don't know how to act. But the point is, over Zoom, my guest today is I'm so happy he's here, hilarious comedian, hilarious stand-up. You know him as a writer on Jimmy Kimmel Live. That's one of the good late night shows. There are some stinkers, but Jimmy Kimmel Live ain't one of them, and he helps write that show. So funny. Please give it up for my guest, Mr. Troy Walker.
Hey. I'm happy to be here, man. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy you're here.
You know what's funny about that intro? I actually went to a NASCAR race the other day.
Whoa.
Yeah.
How was it?
Honestly, it was great.
Okay, this is exciting for me, because I was actually having a debate in a different writer's room about whether or not black people can show up to NASCAR and be unbothered. You know what I mean? Like I thought like, all right, I like the idea of getting drunk and watching cars go in circles. That seems fun, but I would imagine that the community of NASCAR is not going to be like chill with me being there.
I mean, it was the first time I'd ever gone to one. And I kind of went, I guess, in that same kind of like, let me just see, I went with like one of my comic friends, Brent Gill. I think you know Brent. Yeah. And so we go out there, we like drive to Fontana or whatever. And I mean, there is that like thing where it's like Trumpy, right? Like there's like the fuck Joe Biden t-shirts and whatever, and like trucks with the big flags and stuff.
Honestly, as it should be. If ever there was a space for that, they built that. If you build it, they will come. Yeah, I get it.
But honestly, the vibe was like pretty good other than that. And there were way more black people than I ever expected to see. Like more black people than I ever expected to see, bro.
That's actually really encouraging.
Yeah, I was blown away, actually, by how many black people are actually there. I have to figure that's Bubba. Like, you know how we do it. Like, oh, there's like a black dude doing that? We're going to like show up.
Was Bubba racing? Was he out there?
Yeah, no, he was there.
How'd he do? What place he come in?
Look, that's not the point. We don't got to talk. Why are you trying to be negative? Look. He was there. That's what matters.
He came in a strong 35th place, and they are saying he's one of the best 35th place performances they've ever seen.
Look, it wasn't his fault. The police kept pulling him over during the race. No, he was like, it was honestly, man, it was like kind of fun. It's loud. It's like, you're just kind of sitting there drinking. It's good.
Yeah,
It's
it
chill.
seems, I mean, like a lot of live sports that are more fun to obviously watch in person than they are on television. I feel this way about baseball. It's one of those things where it seems like you could check out for a while and you
Oh, yeah.
haven't missed a thing. And
Yeah.
so that's great for fucking live because you can just talk some shit, hang out,
Yeah.
and then you go back and it's like, oh yeah, they're still doing loop-de-loops. Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's also like in person, it feels like less time when they're on the other side than it does on TV. Like on TV, it feels like, oh, like, what do you do the other time? Like when they're not right in front of you. But like right there, I mean, they're going so fast that it's like, it's pretty quick. It actually was like nowhere near as boring as I thought it might be. And it was like, I don't know, it was like good energy.
They do 500 laps. That's the deal.
No, I think the one I saw was like maybe 150.
Oh, so I'm way over. Okay.
Or
Hell
200 or something. It wasn't like anything because I thought like the same thing. It was like something like 200, but I know it wasn't actually 200 laps. I think it was like 150 because they did like 3 stages. Like I learned like a decent amount while I was there. They do like the races in stages.
Now, see, I'm going to fuck around and go somewhere and be like, what they doing, 500 laps? And then those white people are going to have a reason to beat my ass. You know what I mean? They're going to be like, look, man, we're cool with y'all being here, but you can't be in here dumb as fuck asking 500 lap questions.
But it was like, then like people like wearing like his stuff, like his like Bubba Wallace's jerseys and stuff. Yeah, it felt
oh
very,
shit, he got jersey. I gotta get me a Bubba Wallace jersey.
Yeah,
number 35.
Jerseys, jackets,
Bubba Wallace.
Yeah, you can get a whole jacket and everything.
I love that. Okay, we can't talk about Bubba and his shenanigans all day because you came to us with a conspiracy theory that, frankly, I don't know that I've ever heard before, and I'm super excited to talk about. You said, my mama told me
slavery was fake, and black people were already in America.
I saw this on Twitter a while back, and then apparently it like B.O.B. is like kind of a believer in this. Like I sent like an article I found about this. Like,
well, yes, and I dove deep into the article. The article is actually written by a former guest on the show, Michael Harriot of The Root, and it is jarring discovery from B.O.B. That's right. Yeah. Bob has discovered that slavery, in fact, is a complete ruse. Because, and he's not exactly clear why, but it's a complete ruse because black people, I guess, were in America before we were originally brought here, quote unquote, originally brought here via slave ship.
Yeah, like he like was saying, one of like that. It's like shit where you're like, that's not true. Like something so easily disprovable. Like he's like, you ever notice you never see a slave ship? Like, yeah, I feel like. You just told me you don't go to museums, bro. I feel like that's the only thing you told me.
Sure. Okay, so I think based on your energy alone, I get the sense that you're not bought in on this conspiracy theory. That this is not
hell no.
This is not one you're subscribing to. And B.O.B. is not a selling point for you. You're not B.O.B. doesn't make you want to believe it more?
Nah, bro. Come on now. I'll admit I had his albums.
Sure.
I'll admit that.
A lot of people did.
I had his albums, but no.
Let me ask you this. When did you first discover that B.O.B. is a conspiracy theorist? Was this the one that broke you open, or were you aware of his earlier conspiracy theories? Excuse me.
I don't know that I know of his other conspiracy theories.
Oh, this is fun. Does he have
like a whole litany?
Yeah, well, he has one that really ruined his career, and he was an early investor in the flat earth movement. He was actually one of the first sort of like celebrity people to come forward and be like, the earth ain't round, it's flat. And he even went so far as to make a very public GoFundMe so that he could invest in creating a satellite type situation so that he could prove that the earth is flat. He's fully invested. This isn't just like
Really?
a passive theory for him.
He invested in a satellite.
No. He invested in setting up a GoFundMe so that the public could invest in a satellite that I guess he was going to build to try to figure out if the Earth is in fact flat.
I mean, sometimes, how you go like some people shouldn't have money.
Yeah.
Like where you go like somebody else should be in charge of their money.
Absolutely.
And I feel like that's one of those situations, but it's also like bad because it's like he wasn't even going to put his money behind it. Like he was like, I'm going to start a GoFundMe.
No. And I would dare to say it's because he doesn't have much money left. I don't know that B.O.B. is now raking in the coin from those early 2000s hits that probably have not carried as long as we wish they would have.
Oh, God. He spent all the Strange Clouds money?
Yeah, man. It's all gone. What was that? The joint with Bruno Mars? It's gone.
Yeah.
It's done, man. Okay, so you're not bought in on B.O.B.'s conspiracy theories. It sounds like any of them. Certainly not the current one, the most recent one that we're talking about.
No. I mean, how could you? That's like a hard one.
Sure.
Like
it seems silly. Let me ask you this now follow-up question, I guess. Are you a person who buys into conspiracy theory in general? Are you like anti-conspiracy theory? Or are you very much like, no, the government tells us the truth and I dig what they got going on?
I don't feel like it's those extremes.
Sure. Oh, you didn't like the setup, the trap that I put you in?
No, I don't know that you have to be. I think you can be like, I think most conspiracy theories are trash, but
yeah,
but I also don't think like, oh, the government tells us everything is truth. Yeah. But I think like, I mean, I think that would be like, that's a silly black man that believes that.
Yeah.
I don't know who that is. I know he wears a lot of polo shirts.
Yeah. Frankly, I don't even know if he's still doing that. Nobody's checked on B.O.B. in so long that his style, his energy has changed in a way that who knows what he looks like.
Who knows what he's doing. But no, I wouldn't say, I don't typically subscribe to conspiracy theories because I feel like the thing about conspiracy theories is they always require like a bunch of stuff to perpetuate themselves, like it's always like one of those things where like the second there's like evidence against the conspiracy, they have to like use that as more evidence of the conspiracy, it's always like, you're like, people are like, that's not a thing. I have like a chart with numbers that shows you why that's not true. And they go, yeah, well, who made that chart? They're just in on it, right? Like, it's just like, and I'm just not, I have a law degree, man. Like, I just can't think like that, Like,
yeah, I think I've talked about this before on the podcast, but when Kyrie came out as a quote unquote flat earther, I was actually there. He talked about it at the All-Star game. I believe it was like 2016, 2017. I was there shooting a VR thing for, I think it was Oculus or some shit. I don't remember. Mm-hmm. But the point is, I was sort of like standing near the podiums of everything that was, the All-Stars were all sitting around there doing their various press conferences, whatever. And they asked LeBron, actually, because Kyrie had said it earlier that morning, and then they asked LeBron, because they were still on the Cavs together at the time. They're like, hey, Bron, have you heard that your star teammate thinks that the earth is flat? And then LeBron yells over to the other podium that Kyrie is at, and he goes, yo, Ree, you think the earth is flat? And then you can see Kyrie go, and it's very much, this is early in Kyrie trolling, doing the thing phase. I think he's in a much different space now. But at the time, you just see Kyrie's eyes get real low and he goes, yeah. And you can tell he doesn't fucking believe it. But what he did sort of suggest in things that I followed up on and things that I read, and even Steph Curry got in trouble for some weird conspiracy theory shit around the same time. And the point that I think a lot of these guys kept trying to make is that history books don't always tell us the truth. And so there's plenty of reason for us to question the history that we have. And I think that's sort of like the dangerous game that conspiracy theory creates, because that statement is 100% true. History books lie to us constantly. We're not always being presented with the truth, even in current media. That said, there has to be a point where you stop asking questions and you take it at a level of face value. And if you keep just asking more and more, well, how do we know? How do we know? You're just trapped in a very dumb tunnel.
Yeah, man. I used to have a bit about how you can't question everything. Like, because at a certain point, you have to trust something. Because the thing is, the other thing about the conspiracy theory people to me is they trust people. Mm-hmm. It's not that they don't. Like, in fact, they're like the most trusting people I've probably ever talked to in my life. It's always like, but the difference is that instead of trusting the CIA, they trust like a dude with like a clip art website, right? Like it's it's not like I'm not saying you should trust the CIA. I don't think you should. Certainly not as a black person. They have like, there's like tons of history of like
they're pretty cool. Let's take it easy. The CIA is fucking nailing it, and we all should be big fans.
Right, but I'm saying like, if you're gonna go like, okay, I don't trust the New York Times.
Yeah,
but like I would be more amenable to it if you were to say, but I also don't trust this like dude on Reddit. But they're like completely all in on dude on Reddit. And that's like, so to me, it's like not that they don't trust everything. It's like, if anything, to me, they probably don't question enough. They just question, they question anything that isn't them being in on something.
Yeah, I mean, I think to some extent it's the trust is, I trust that there are more questions here. And that's probably a good instinct, right? Like that almost feels like some scientific method shit. Yeah. But then the questions that you're asking are falling far short of anything scientific. It's just being like, well, how do you know? And it like, I don't, bro. Like I can't prove every single element of this because I'm not an expert in every field. No one is. And so it becomes this unwinnable game that only they can sort of like stake a flag in.
Yeah, but it's also like there are experts in fields, but sometimes like they'll act like the person who is an expert can't be trusted specifically because they are an expert, like that kind of thing, And it's like, but that, like, I guess in the end, it's like you can question everything, but at a certain point, you have to trust something specifically because you can't, like, nobody can be an expert in everything.
Yeah.
Like, so ultimately you have to trust somebody about something. And, on balance, I'd probably rather trust like the dude with a bunch of like degrees and stuff on it than like dude on Reddit.
Yeah, I think, I think there's probably a balance that needs to be had of
just probabilities wise.
I can say, I fuck with the dude on Reddit for introducing me to questions that I had not considered, while simultaneously acknowledging that these educated people probably are coming from a level of know-how and learning that is still useful to the greater good of the world, or at least greater learning of the world.
Right. Yeah.
It's a dance. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. But I also like tend to like, I kind of like operate on that. Like, what is it like? They say like never like attribute to malice what you can attribute to stupidity or something like that. Like, I think a lot of stuff happens because people are idiots.
Yeah.
So like, I don't need to like see like a whole bunch of like lines between everything sometimes, if like the simplest explanation, this is probably like a big screw up.
Right.
Like,
this is just
big screw up.
Yeah, and I do think that also is a thing that conspiracy theory sometimes misses, is that it creates like a giant, massive conspiratorial, like everybody behind the curtain was moving perfectly to create this dangerous mayhem, whatever thing to happen, when in reality, most of us are idiots. Like the
Right.
absolute vast majority of the world is run and moved by idiots. Even the people who are intelligent are only intelligent in specific ways and often fumble in other ones. And that
Right.
means that those idiots fuck up. And then that creates a way that sometimes people are hurt or sabotaged or treated poorly. And
Right.
we ain't going to apologize. So we just invest in the damage that we've done instead of just being like, oh, fuck, Steve's a dummy. I don't know what to tell you. That's why that happened.
Yeah, bro. Like, I feel like the other thing about it is like, it's interesting to me with like conspiracy theories a lot of times, because it will be like this thing where they'll be like, where everything behind the scenes operated perfectly to like make this conspiracy, when like nothing works like that. Like, like for the conspiracy to be true, like all of the different parties and like organizations and people and all, and none of it would get out. None of it gets out officially. Everybody keeps their mouth shut. Nobody tells their cousin when they're drinking or something. Like none of that stuff ever happens. And everybody pulls off the conspiracy perfectly.
Yeah.
Like that's just not how anything
Yeah,
works.
nobody's snitching, nobody's fumbling the truly in like super like complicated thing that's happening in front of you. It just is, everybody's working perfectly and it never fumbles. But apparently on the other side, we fumble all the time. It's too complicated for it to all work out the way that the conspiracy theorists want us to believe. That said, I think it's also more complicated than oftentimes the history books try to break it down, where it's just like, a few mean men did a mean thing, and those mean men are gone now, and we're all sweethearts ever since.
Yeah. Nah, I don't believe that shit either. Yeah. I think you can like, I think there's a difference between saying they don't tell you the whole story versus that there's a completely different story that has nothing to do with it. Like, they obviously don't tell you the whole story, and they obviously try to sanitize it and everything. But yeah, I don't tend to go in too deep on conspiracy theories. There are certain ones that I'll be like, yeah, maybe. I feel like there's probably something to that. And then there are like other ones that are obviously have been proven true.
Well, let me ask you this before we go to break. I guess I want us to get back to the conspiracy theory at hand. I think we've been living a lot in theory right now, which is nice. I'm enjoying the conversation. Don't you stop having a good convo with me, Troy. But I'm wondering if there's any element of the conspiracy theory at hand that you are bought into. Do you know what I mean? That like basically B.O.B. and people like him are suggesting that slave ships did not exist, and that slavery as it was, at least as the way that we understand it, didn't exist, and that Black people existed in America well before we think they did, that we are more original to America than we are led to believe. Is there any element of that where you're like, I can see what they're doing there? From
the stuff I've seen?
Yeah.
No.
Whoa. You're like, because, nah, these niggas just making stuff up.
Because to me, it's like, and I guess maybe in a way I sort of respond viscerally to it, because in a way it feels like letting white people off the hook in a way.
Oh, interesting.
You know what I'm saying? Because it feels like it's almost like they go, like the Atlantic slave trade is like one of the greatest genocides in human history.
Sure.
And so for you to act like it didn't exist, to me, is like, it's like Holocaust denial to me.
Oh, so like, that's interesting.
And there's like things like that really bother me about it. And so in a way, it kind of, because from what I've seen, basically the argument is like, they tell you that so they can subjugate you so that you don't know that you were already here.
Yep.
Right? But the subjugation after slavery existed whether slavery happened or not, right? Mm-hmm. But in saying that it didn't, you take a whole horrible piece of that history away.
Yeah.
And act like it didn't happen. Arguably one of the worst parts, because of the amount of time slaves like were, they were branded in Africa, had to walk like miles and miles and miles before they even sold, put on the ships. Then the ships sat on the coast of Africa, often for months before they even departed. People just sat there longer on the coast of Africa in those tight quarters on those ships before the ships even left Africa to head across the Middle Passage.
Right.
And you've gotten rid of all of that. And you've turned it into
all to be able to create like a American nigga origin story. And
it's like, and to what purpose?
Well, and to your point, I think the purpose almost is not worth the sacrifice that's being presented, right? That like the transatlantic slave trade is not something you can dismiss,
right?
Or should be dismissed, rather, simply to be able to say, "Nah, brother, wake up. You belong in America. You are of America, and your history is rooted here." And so it creates this sort of complicated dance, I guess, where it's like, I think their intention is good, right? They're saying like, look, you don't have to feel like a foreigner in your own country. You should feel pride in sort of knowing that you are of this land. But in doing so, I think to your point, you're also dismissing the insane amount of genocide, sacrifice, whatever you want to call it, that happened before this from generations of people.
Yeah. Right. And I don't think it's a choice. Like, I think it's like to me, the whole reason Black Americans can have pride and ownership in this land is because our blood is in the soil. That's the entire reason. Like, this shit is mine. Like, that's, if there's anything that kind of bothers me about like some of that shit where like, you know, all the like Trumpies and stuff, and they try to like claim that, like, man, like all the Black people that I grew up idolizing, like my Black heroes were Americans, whether that's Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, whether that's Jackie Robinson, like whether that's Frederick Douglass, like whatever. Like, we've fought in every single war this country's ever had. Against like all odds. We helped build this bitch. We built the White House, nigga. I don't need you to make up a fake story for me.
Right.
like, if anything, the whole reason this is the only shit I have is because that happened.
Yeah, I got you.
So like, it's like, to me, it's like a false choice. It's like you're taking the reality of the pain of this away to give me something that I already had, bro.
Well, I'll say this. Your heroes may have fought here, but my heroes are Kimmel and Dikembe Mutombo. So we differ in that way.
But Dikembe was a nugget. So for me, him too.
Those are the only civil rights leaders I acknowledge is former NBA centers. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be back with more Troy Walker and more My Mama Told Me. And we are back.
You got what I need. I'm trying to.
Yeah, we're back here with more Troy Walker, more My Mama Told Me. We're still talking about the possibility that slavery is a long con. It's a big ruse that was played on all of us because Black people were in America to begin with. We've always been here, they say on the internet in their lonely little pockets of stuff. Do you know at all if that there's any truth to that side of it, that Black people were in fact originally in America before the transatlantic slave trade introduced us?
I feel like I heard some kind of thing a long time ago about how like supposedly some ship, like there was like some historical record thing for like a ship from Africa having like made it to the New World at some point. But I'd have to like dig into that, like, and, research it. But I feel like I heard that like a long time ago. It's also possible that I completely just made that shit up.
Well, rest your furrowed brow, Troy, because I took the time to do some of that research. And I can tell you that as it turns out, there were a ton of Black people who participated in the Age of Exploration, which was the early 1500s, and who found themselves traveling to North, Central, and South America for new lives and new opportunities. So Black people were, in fact, touching the Americas well before the transatlantic slave trade ever happened. Now, I'm sure you know about like the being aware of like the 1619 Project, where they talk about the fact that, 20 something Black people were sort of like introduced to America in, I believe, Jonestown. And that was the beginning of the quote unquote slave trade to the Americas. But it says, at least from the very short and possibly short-sighted research I did, that all the way back to the early 1500s, Black people were kicking it around here.
I mean, I buy that.
All right.
Like, here's why I buy that. Because, I was listening to this other podcast. It's like a history podcast because I'm like a big nerd and shit.
All right.
And it was talking about how it was like a thing I hadn't really considered, which is that like Africans are of the old world.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's like a reason Othello's a Moor, right? Like there's like, obviously it wasn't like Europeans in the 1400s weren't aware of Black people. Like that's right. And there was movement between all those countries and all that kind of stuff. Like it's to me, it stands to reason that Black people would have made it to America.
Yeah.
In another capacity.
And I do think, again, if we're talking about sort of like the intentional manipulation of history, this feels like a great example of it is not working to any colonizer's advantage to suggest that Black people were here before they were. Do you know what I mean? That like if early 1500s Black people had already been traveling and already knew how to get here and all that stuff, then that sort of like dismisses a lot of the quote unquote discovery of America. All the things that we've been told in terms of like, oh, this is when Americans, as it were, started to arrive. So it's easier to just be like, nah, man, Black people didn't come here until we brought them here. And so, technically you are visitors or at least unwelcomed guests in our territory. When in fact, we were all as unwelcomed as everybody else. You know what I mean? We were all sneaking in this motherfucker. Of course.
Like that, that to me, I don't have, my issue is with like, nah, slavery was fake. Like that's bullshit. That's my issue.
Yeah, no, I think to that point, the fact that Black people existed in America before slavery does not make slavery any less of a real thing for the millions who were unwillingly transported to this country. And moreover, I read in the article about the often overlooked relationship between Black people, like captive Black people and Native Americans that was born during slavery.
Right. Yeah, there's like a whole broad like history of it. I think my thing about that conspiracy is it's like this weird like Hotep inception thing that ends up being self-defeating in a way. It's like man, like all of this stuff, like I was saying, like Africans of the old world, like Africans. Countries had kingdoms and everything else. It stands, for thousands of years.
Boats.
It stands completely to read boats.
Yeah, niggas know how to use boats. Let's just be as frank as possible. It doesn't matter if you have kingdoms and math and all the other shit. We had fucking boats and we knew how to travel. And y'all are trying to pretend like we were just so dumb and so naked that like we couldn't even figure out how to float on water. Y'all didn't invent that shit, man. Relax.
Right. Yeah, of course. My thing is just don't tell me they ain't do all that other shit.
Right. Now, to the question or the point of the Black people and the Native Americans, because I do think that this is an important point that might coincide with some of what's happening in the Hoteps, the BOB mindset, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Native Americans, which I didn't realize, and is not something that's often, I guess, promoted, advertised, published in a lot of our history books. But Native Americans were also forced into slavery in this country alongside their Black counterparts, right? They shared bondage, and oftentimes they found themselves in this shared bondage hooking up. They were intermingling. They, relationships were being born.
Yeah.
And sometimes those relationships would even go so far as to marriage. But because that marriage between a Native American person and a Black person was considered such a taboo, they never were allowed to make those marriages legal. And so there's very little documentation of the actual bonds that were built between these groups. And subsequently, the children that were born of those relationships were often forced into a more extreme version of slavery, because you're basically like a little cursed child, like a little, what the fuck is this homunculus baby that nobody wanted? And so it just turns into this weird game, I think, for the hoteps that read this thing, where we're conflating this relationship that goes undocumented and these relationships that no one talks about with an origin story. These relationships weren't coming before America started. We're just having relationships with the people who were here before America started and intermixing. And now your history is tied with their history in a way that isn't being acknowledged.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, that's, you put people together, man. That happens. It's just like Black indentured servants would hook up with Irish indentured servants and and like all that, like in the 1600s, before slavery was specifically about race, and there were Black indentured servants. They would sometimes like have babies and stuff with these like white immigrants from Europe and stuff like that. It like the race-based slavery, my understanding is, came later as a way. Slavery had been like a thing throughout history, but to make it specifically like if you're Black, you're a slave, was a very American thing.
Well, yeah, and it's a very American thing that we do in a lot of ways, right? It's branding. Right. We truly are. We love fucking capitalism in this country, and we have since its conception. And so I think in a lot of ways, it's like, well, what's the easiest way to ensure that our slaves remain slaves and don't start finding upward mobility? We base it off of their skin color. And that you can't dismiss your skin. You can say you ain't Irish. You can say you ain't Italian. You can pretend to be not Jewish or whatever the fuck it is that we were attempting to attach to people's shame. But Black, that shit's permanent, baby. And Native American, y'all dark too. We'll fuck you up the same way.
Yeah, man. And I think like that thing, there's something to the, like, there are all these other aspects of the history that aren't told the same way. What I think the issue with them, what they're doing is they go, there are all these other aspects of the history that aren't told the same way. So that breaks, it's like they go like the percentage of it overall in the whole like spectrum of the history of slavery and everything, right? Mm-hmm. Like they dismiss like the 75% of it.
Yeah.
Because the 25% isn't as well documented or as well publicized, right? Like you watch like documentaries on slavery, they basically talk about the biggest part. They don't talk about the Native American part as much. They don't talk about, if they do at all, whatever. But that is not a reason to dismiss the slave trade.
No. And it's similar in an odd way. I didn't know this either, but there were also Native Americans who owned Black slaves.
There were Black people who owned slaves.
Yes, that this is a more complicated thing than just being like white people devil, Black people good, Native Americans good. But like, there were people who were just taking advantage of the times and the financial institutions at play, and they were able to own slaves. But even during their ownership, the intermingling, much in the way that we saw with the whites, was still happening. And so it is creating even more complicated, inconvenient conversations to say, like, the slave owners were fucking the slaves and they didn't really want to be slave owners sometimes, but it was the best way to make money. And here's this and that and all of these things. When the reality is the easiest way to settle all of this is just to be like, we brought you here at this point, you showed up and we yelled at you for a while, beat the shit out of you, and then we let you go. Problem solved. Everybody's free. And now we get to move on with America as it is. And it's like, yeah, I think there's a few more things going on here, fellas.
Oh, yeah. There's a ton more going on. Yeah, man, I actually was like reading this thing the other day about this woman, a black woman who had been a slave and then she got her freedom. And I forget how, I think she maybe married like into some money or whatever and like went out and got slaves as soon as she could.
Yeah.
And like has there's like a historical plantation, I think in Florida, that was like a black-owned plantation, which is like one of the wildest fucking things you could think about, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's like a national like landmark, I guess.
I mean, it seems less wild, I guess, if she wasn't a former slave. Like if it was just a lady who was like, I can't wait to own me a nigger. That seems, I can see how you make it to that point as a black person in this country. But if you went through it, the idea of being like, soon as I get out, I'm going to put someone else through that shit. That's wild.
Yeah, it was so wild, man. Like I went down like a whole like internet like rabbit hole, like just reading about craziness.
Damn. I hope I'm not related to her. You know, that's a part of our history. So much of our history as black people is cut off from us, and some of it is intentional and some of it is just our families don't track that stuff the same way that white historians have long sort of made the checkpoints for tracking.
Yeah.
But
that's because ours ends in like 1808. It's like, well, it stopped at the water. We tried to trace it back.
Right. I don't know what country we came from, but I guess Maryland is where I started. But that said, I do feel like a bunch of us at some point are going to start figuring out that like we just have black slave owners in our family or white ones. You know what I mean? That we're just
maybe you'll be the first. Maybe you'll be the first person on talking to Henry Louis Gates. You'll be the first black dude that gets that where he goes like this and you go, ugh.
He's just going to look at my papers and be like, hey, can we cut to commercial, fellas? I don't know if this one's as good of an episode as the previous.
You're like, this is what your grandmother did. And you go,
not me, Ma. Oh, God. Oh, Henry, let's talk to Nas again. It was much better when you talked to Nas.
Somebody has to be the first black person to be embarrassed on finding your roots.
Well, I guess I'm willing, if it means more TV time, I'm willing to make that sacrifice. I will be the first person to come forward as the descendant of a black slave owner. Exciting times for me. Terrible news for the rest of America. All right, we're going to take one more break. We'll be back with more Troy Walker and more My Mama Told Me. And we are back.
I can go anywhere.
Suck my dick.
Yeah, we're back here with more Troy Walker, more My Mama Told Me. We're still talking about the fact that the slave trade may be a long con. It might be a big old trick that the white man is playing on us because we've been Americans this entire time is what they're saying. And Troy does not believe it. He's furious at the idea. He'll beat your ass, B.O.B. That's what he said during break.
If I see that nigga, I'm going to punch him into the clouds, into the strange clouds.
Okay, I have a few more, research points that I'd love to unpack with you. Because one of the first questions that I asked myself as I was sort of sitting down to look through all of this is, and I'm maybe a little embarrassed to say it, but the question that popped in my head is, why don't we see more slave ships? You know, because to your point, there are a few museums that have remnants and sort of like pieces of slave ships or ships that transported slaves. But it's not as if like, given the scale of what the transatlantic slave trade was, it's not as if we're seeing a shit ton of them or even know where all of them, any of them, frankly, ended up? And so that was a question that I immediately asked myself. Now, I have some answers, but I have a feeling you have an answer on the tip of your tongue as to why we haven't seen them.
I mean, I guess I figured I didn't research it.
That's okay.
I mean, I know, like,
that's not your responsibility.
like, I know, like the Smithsonian has some stuff and like some others have some stuff, and they're like, I figure it was probably because they were mostly wood. And I figured that was probably a significant part of it. I also figured it's not exactly like the kind of ship that, like, at the time they were trying to, like, you know, coat and lacquer and keep around. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like it's like, again, when you do that with, like, oh, this ship took out 6 British frigates, right? Like, in the Revolutionary War. I get why you saved that one.
Yeah.
I don't know if you necessarily go through the effort to, like,
sure.
You probably take it apart and build something.
6 British frigates, 500 African nigglets. One of those is worth like, celebrating.
Yeah, it wasn't like they didn't know slavery was bad at the time. Like, I feel like it's like this thing where, like, you know, like, sometimes they, like, in a way, people will act like they didn't know, but they knew. Like, they were well aware. They knew slavery was bad. I don't know that anybody was trying to, like...
Right. There had to be people on the boat being like, hey, not gonna lie, this is fucked up. I know we getting paid. Knew. I'm really happy to be working with you fellas, but this is pretty fucked up.
The original Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson wrote called out King George saying, like, how dare you have introduced slavery? You stole all these, like, it's like, they knew.
Yeah. And to that point, I've done a fair amount of research on Thomas Jefferson's black ass. And that's for the listeners. They know that he's secretly mixed. But the point is, Thomas Jefferson actually, despite having owned slaves, was super anti-slavery. He, like, wrote constantly about how, like, man, slavery is trash, and then would go fuck a slave later that night who did not want to be a part of that. It wasn't like they were making love. That these were unwilling fucks.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's not like this, but, like, it's like this. It's like how...
Always a good start to an analogy.
Like, I'll be like, man, what Kanye's doing, he's, like, tripping. But, like, nigga, I'll buy any album he makes. There's, like, every...
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, I'll be like, oh, this is, like, horrible. Like, he's stalking her. It's, like, all this stuff. And then, like, he'll put out... Like, I saw, like, that video where he, you know, buries Pete Davidson up to his neck and all that stuff. And I was like, man, that's, like, awful. This motherfucker's crazy. And then it was the first thing I played when I got in my car.
Oh, shit. So you are the same type of hypocrite. I love that.
I'm awful. I'm terrible.
Well, to your point, and you said wood, and a part of me wanted to do the Steve Harvey. Good answer. You know what I mean? I think you nailed it. Wood apparently.
Is it up on the board?
Can I see wood? She said. It turns out that, to your point, most of the materials that slave ships were made of weren't exactly going to stand the test of time, right? Wood is a very flimsy, easily deteriorating material, and between shipwrecks and time, the once powerful slave ships were no longer able to hold up. The same, because that got me thinking, like, well, is that actually true for all of these other famous ships that we've heard of over time? And the same apparently is true for ships like the Mayflower. The Mayflower, no one has seen in any version of recent history, and many believe the ship was scrapped for timber and other recyclable materials. And to your grander point about the not wanting to keep these things around, I have to assume that with the fall of the transatlantic slave trade, those ships likely faced a similar fate where they were recycled by the owners who could probably no longer afford to keep these deteriorating ships with no niggers at the bottom. You know what I mean? If you can't keep the blacks at the bottom, these ships are fucking worthless and carry quite a bit of shame with them. So we'll turn those into panels for people's houses.
Yeah, it's like... As a kid, you ever build, like, a Lego thing that you were real proud of? And then, like, you needed the Legos for something else? And you might not want to take it apart, but you do. But now imagine that those Legos were evil.
Sure.
Think about how fast you would take it apart, right?
Now, what if those Legos killed your grandma? Now, would you take that?
Imagine if your entire family for generations would be shamed by that Lego house you built.
It might change your mind about the Legos.
How fast you would take it apart. You take it apart real fast.
I love that. So in thinking about, I guess, the slave ships and the pieces that are often that go missing, I found this article in National Geographic about a group that had uncovered, it's called Portugal's São José Paquete de Africa. It was a slave ship that set sail from Mozambique in 1794, destined for Brazil, and basically never made it. A whole bunch of people died on that slave ship. And these black divers, these black scuba divers, were the main people sort of leading this excavation of this famous slave ship, which I thought was extremely telling. You know, black scuba divers are the only motherfuckers looking for this shit.
Right. Yeah, because I don't know if it's like, imagine being like the white dude who's like, ooh, I'm going to find me some slave ships. What did you say it was called again?
You're going to make me say it again. São José Paquete de Africa.
I wanted you to say it again because it reminded me of like me trying to like order on a menu that I
sure.
can't read. I'll take the São José, this one.
I'm not even going to pretend to do Portuguese because I know it's not a Spanish accent, but I know it's not far. I just embarrass myself if I even attempted. So I'm just going to stick with the worst American version of it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, like when you go, like, you ever go out of the country, like, you're like, in some other country, you don't speak the language, and you're like,
Good point.
You try to say it.
Yeah, I always find that when I travel, I get about 3 attempts in before I completely revert to asking for the dude that can speak English to come help me with whatever it is. I went to Mexico City a couple of years ago, and I was like by myself trying to figure some shit out. And after about 3 attempts, I was like, you know what, y'all? I ain't got to do this, and you don't need me to do this. There's enough of you that speak English, and I apologize for being the ignorant American who needs this, but I can't keep attempting to use my remedial Spanish and failing this majorly.
Yeah, man. I did the same thing in Montreal. I was like, I tried to pay with American money at a thing, and this lady got really mad at me. I didn't even mean to. I thought it would be like a good... Right. I feel like every black person feels like you're going to be a better tourist, like an international tourist, than like what you hear white people are like. And
no.
Not even a little, bro.
Nope. Not even for a second.
Not even black countries. I went to Jamaica and we stayed at a resort, and it was my entire family was just black people complaining about the food. It was like the
boy.
It was like, it's too salty.
And they're just sucking their teeth and rolling their eyes at you.
Just like, man, well, I guess this is what they did to us.
So to the slave ship conversation, one of the things that you said that I think is really important is part of the reason we're not uncovering these remnants of this history is because white people aren't eagerly investing the efforts or the manpower to uncover this history. And this is actually a direct quote from the article that this puts it in perspective in a really jarring way. But there were over 12,000 ships making over 40,000 voyages over 250 years of slave trade. To date, there are only five slave ships in maritime history in the database. Why is that? 5.
There's only five ships. When you say in the maritime database, what do you mean? Like that you can go visit?
Meaning that there are only 5 that they've documented as their purpose was for transferring black people, as far as I'm understanding. That like they have 5 ships that they know for sure they can prove had black people on them, transferring them to these various places.
I mean, that seems low, because I know there's documented like companies that they had in Europe that was like that they would literally call themselves like the black shipping like whatever, like.
Yeah, no, I think part of it is an intentional sort of like erasing of that documentation afterwards.
I think so.
That it's not that they never documented it. It's that since then they did a lot of work to sort of like squeaky clean that situation.
Well, yeah, and I think like after like, because they banned the importation of slaves in like 1808.
Mm-hmm.
So after that, it was illegal. Most of those slave runs would have been illegal. So you probably don't, keep like records of it. But then, yeah, they probably didn't exactly take that much care in trying to keep up with it.
No, and for what? What do you want to tell people about this for? Cut it out.
I don't know, man. That's what I'm saying. I think like it's one of those things where, as if you remember that people at the time knew it was bad, like a lot of stuff to me starts to fall into place where you go like, yeah, they probably didn't want to like maintain the records the same way. They probably didn't want to maintain the ships and like evidence of it the same way. They probably were faster to repurpose stuff in ways that they wouldn't have otherwise, to go like, oh, we used to use this ship for that, like now let's use it for this, and not say anything about what we used to use it for. Like that seems...
Exactly. I think the larger point that the quote is trying to make is that these documentations are being erased, and then subsequently the ships are being repurposed. And so now we only have 5 ships that we can actually point to and say, we know for sure this existing piece of material held the bodies of Black people being transferred from this place to the next.
Right. So those 5 like currently exist. Like you can go see them.
That's my understanding. Yeah.
See that? So, okay. See, I was confused. I thought you were saying like in like written record. There's
no.
I
think they have more records of people being transferred, although I don't know that they have nearly as many records as the amount of people transferred and the amount of trips.
Right.
But I think for the current existing, like they have 5 for sure. This is the body of the ship that transferred these people at the time.
Right. Okay. That makes more sense, because I was like, man, like they only know the names of 5 of them?
No, they know the names of way more.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. That's why I was like, I misunderstood you. I was like, oh,
if it was just 5, if there's more Jacksons than there are names of ships, then maybe B.O.B. is right, and we're foolish to be having this conversation.
Yeah, I misunderstood you. Okay, you could go visit 5.
Yeah, it sounds like that.
I don't know. That's like one of those things where you go like, would I want to visit a slave ship as a Black man?
Yeah, they used to make us do it in like middle school and shit, where it wasn't we visited a slave ship, but you had to like, we went to the museum and they would make you lay on the ground and do the thing where like you had to lay side by side with the other kids to feel what it was like to be in the cargo of these ships. And yeah, you don't need to do that. You could just tell me, I don't need to feel that. Maybe that's better for white students. Maybe they need that experience, that empathy to sort of like kick in. For me, I was like, this feels fucking dumb. Why am I here? I ain't doing nothing to nobody. My grandma did that.
It also doesn't like exactly work when you're going to like get up in a second and they're going to be like, all right, so here's everybody's sandwiches.
Yeah. All right, Lunchables. If you got the pizza Lunchable, you stand in this line, and everybody else this way.
Yeah, it's not like that. Doesn't like, but I do think there's like an overall treatment of slavery that is in some ways not serious.
Mm-hmm.
In a general sense, like it's like how people will have a plantation wedding, right?
Oh.
Or how like there are plantations all over the South that are like Airbnbs now, right?
Yeah.
Or like you can go on YouTube. I did this the other day. I got so fucking mad. You can go on YouTube. You know how people will do like the video real estate tours?
Yeah.
And like this lady starts off and goes, so I just want to start off by saying that this house did have enslaved workers, but all of the like slave stuff has been torn down. Like it was like a selling point. Like, don't worry, there's no like cabins back there. Like,
don't worry, the slaves, they got booted a while ago, but
you can totally move into this.
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing is crazy when you really think about it, right? Like,
I mean, I think to the larger point that you made early in the conversation, there's a real danger in our willingness to dismiss or skip over the scale and weight and importance of all of these things. And while I don't want to find myself in some situation where like I'm constantly yelling at people because of slavery,
right.
I do think that like we need to find some sort of balance in saying like,
right.
Hey dog, we don't just get to pretend like these plantations you've preserved don't come with a cost. Weren't built on the lives of a lot of people who made sacrifices they didn't even want to make. They weren't even that heroic in that sense. They didn't come here to be like, I want to help America find its voice. They're like, that wasn't the shit. They were forced into this shit, and y'all then get to celebrate off of their bones. That's weird.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think there's any like responsibility to be like constantly angry or yelling at people. But I do think it's important for me to be aware of how bad it was.
Yeah.
As far as informing my conception of self and conception of self within this nation. Doesn't mean I don't have pride in it, but part of that comes from the rise, right? Like from people going from about the lowest station they could to like, we two niggas on TV, bro.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I can take pride in that. Like while knowing it at the same time. I don't need B.O.B. to like make up a thing and like dismiss this for me to like own it, you know?
So just to be clear, you take no pride in the lessons from B.O.B. Not one. No. Damn. Well, B.O.B., this was a great episode for us. Devastating episode for you, B.O.B. I don't think you get to walk away from this episode unscathed as much as you thought you might have at the beginning.
Hey, you know, sometimes you put yourself out there.
B.O.B. was just putting himself out there and it didn't work out for him. But this was great, Troy. This was a fun episode. Could you tell the people where they can find you and what cool shit you have going on?
They can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Troy Walker ESQ.
Hell yeah.
And, you know, I'm just writing for the show. I'm doing stand-up. Watch Jimmy Kimmel live. Maybe you see some of my nonsense.
All right. Well, watch Jimmy Kimmel live. Follow Troy on Instagram and Twitter. Do all of that stuff. And as always, you can follow me at Langston Kerman on all platforms. Would love for you to do that. I'd fucking love it. And watch Bust Down. It's on Peacock. It's a nonsense show I made with my friends, and I would love for more of you to see it. And then finally, if you want to subscribe to the podcast, review the podcast, do all the things that podcasts are meant to have done to them consensually, then feel free to do it and send all of your conspiracy theories to mymommapod@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Okay, I did all my spiel. Bye, bitch.